when did it begin for you, and what are some of the sort of obstacles you faced on your own personal journey that have led you to this work?
Yeah, well, I think for me to actually become a family mediator with an interest in trauma, it was almost like a series of events that sort of led me into this direction, because originally I really wanted to be a family lawyer. And that's, I studied law and, was sort of, I guess determined to graduate and be a lawyer or a solicitor, as we call it here. And it's sort of a case of pursuing what I thought I wanted and then finding out it's not for me, but, getting into something else. And it was during my last few months in legal training, where there was a compulsory mediation component. And I already had cemented in my mind I wanted to work in family law. So the topic was already there. It was just how. And so doing this compulsory mediation component, it was the first time that I felt that I could do it and that it really suited my personality and also my strengths, because I found that the way that the legal system worked and what it called for, it really needed, it was sort of highlighting my weaknesses. That makes sense. So I kind of knew I could do it, but I might not be any good at it. But then mediation came along as an alternative. And then I started pursuing, that area. And once I started, I had, finished the study and started working, I thought it only made sense for me to then become a couples counsellor and family therapist. And so once I started to look at the therapy side of working with families and couples, then it was more evident that there was trauma seeped in, all our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and the way that we respond generally. So it was just from there that I started pursuing anything and everything that I could, whether or not it was going to conferences or workshops or reading books and lectures, and mixing a lot with a lot of counsellors and psychologists as well. Because I was often the only mediator or the only legal person in the room wherever I was. But then it really highlighted to me how the world needs to be more trauma informed and where it's lacked, because I kind of, saw what's needing by finding out what's missing.
That's an awesome journey in terms of like the more I have these conversations, the more I realize we're far more alike than we are different. And this process of like kind of going into things and then realizing that they're not sort of aligned in some ways. But for you, it's cool in that you sort of streamline that down bit by bit and found like an intersection between the stuff you were doing, and then moved bit by bit into these other fields that were much more important to you. And then to have like that final discovery is pretty cool. So going from there, you talk a bit about strength, a kind of strength-based approach to life and adversity. I really like the kind of positive frame in that, like, how we respond to things. What's that philosophy about for you?
Well, I guess I can link it into when I first started working as a family mediator in a government-funded centre with an organisation who really prided themselves on a strengths-based approach. And so it was really interesting for me, because before that, I had worked in either government or private, where it was quite competitive, and it was more about highlighting individuals' faults that needed to be improved on. So when I, got this first job as a family mediator, my strengths were constantly highlighted, encouraged, and supported. So I was given cases that really supported my character and my strengths and the way that I work. And so it was interesting for me because I had studied a strengths-based approach as a mediator, but then it wasn't until I was in this role and I actually felt it. And my personalities, not so much that it changed, but I just became a lot more confident with myself, or comfortable with myself, because I guess I was giving evidence. I was continually shown evidence of my strengths. And then that, built up my sense of self and my self-esteem. So I kind of thought, oh, this method actually works. And then the more that I was sort of treated in that way, then it became easier for me to then relay that on to my clients and work in a strengths-based way with them. And then after, years of practice, what I started to see that there were trends in the way that people manage adversity, and that if you were able to view your situation and your experience from a strengths-based lens, or sort of leaning more towards strengths than weaknesses or faults and things, there was a higher chance of triumphing, from that adversity, or it would be quicker. So then I started sort of, and also putting together, what I was seeing in mediation rooms, the strengths-based approach that was, that I was feeling, and then what I was starting to read about and hear about in the trauma-informed sort of practice.
That's awesome. It's interesting you say that. I've noticed here in some of these parts, like in Switzerland, friends over there with kids and stuff in the schools. A friend was telling me actually that like the school, the test came back and it was only the mistakes that were highlighted. There was no focus on the ones that were right. It was like the test was actually, it was just like, this is what's wrong. And it kind of resonates what you're saying about like, I'm somebody who's all for sort of leaning into call them the weaknesses or so on, but I'm also a firm believer on this. As you're saying with the adversity, like what has the experience offered you? What has it was as traumatic as it may have been? What has it given you? And I guess it's really kind of counterintuitive in a way when it's something that's potentially so difficult and adverse, but coming out of that process, it's what has this given you to be able to like move forward and thrive from.
And the real challenge is that whether or not we find it, or how easy we find it to look towards our strengths, can also, well, is largely impacted by our early experience and essentially how we were taught to respond to stimulus generally. And it might be that we may have had a super critical parent, or even a perfectionist parent, because it can have the same impression on a child that I'm not good enough, or so there's all these kind of small variables, I guess, that can impact how easy it is to look at the strengths. And I call on the strengths-based practice their way of categorizing all thoughts, feelings, and actions as either coming under what's wrong or what's strong. So if you kind of use that, is my default, have I been taught to go towards what's wrong or what's strong? And sometimes there are different parts of our lives where we can go to the strengths quicker than others. And so there's no sort of magic formula. I guess for me, it's more about the reflection in looking at when, the times that I have gone down the what's wrong path and looked at the weaknesses and blaming and fault and judgment and all that, how quickly was I able, or am I able to then flip that, to then look at, what are the lessons? What can I take from this? How has this helped me?
It's like flipping the narrative, which isn't easy to do. But I also think of validation, there's a lot of talk about, not needing validation, and I understand that, but I also see the value in validation. Like, I'm somebody who actually needs it. I'm not like dependent on it, but I really thrive from it when I'm trying to do something and it's validated. But there is kind of this emphasis on, don't seek validation. Um,
Yeah,
like you,
and it's because we can benefit from that validation because it's acknowledgement that we're on the right track, or what we're thinking or what we're doing makes sense, and that's important. I think even for our own sense of self, because I interpret or view our sense of self as how much we believe in ourselves. That's how it's reflected. So anything that can contribute to how much we believe in ourselves is only going to help us. I guess the flip side there is it how much do we rely on that? Then if we don't get that, then does that mean we can't believe in ourselves without that? And then we're dependent on that. So it's about getting to a point where we can be comfortable, in ourselves, get that acknowledgement, but still, even if we don't get it, we can still continue.
Yeah, regardless of the validation, be independent of it in our own self-belief. But it clearly worked for you, as you were saying, when you went into that environment where it was strength focused, and it just sounds like you thrived from that. So
Yeah, I definitely did, and that was really sort of the starting point, or one of the starting points for major transformation for me in my career, and also in me personally. Because if I'm sort of in a situation where I'm receiving evidence that I'm on the right path, that I'm in a role where my strengths are acknowledged, appreciated, and not just in terms of from colleagues and managers, but I guess even clients. You can see that their responses and things, and it's not that I couldn't have a career or personal growth without that. But for me, at that point in my life, it was what helped me to then step in to really be comfortable with myself,
yeah,
or
that's
more
huge.
comfortable and accept, rather than trying to sort of fit what I think, or fit where I should go, or where maybe others sort of think I should go, because that's where I am in life and I need to be doing this. It just made it easier for me to believe in myself, because then if other people didn't believe in me, it didn't matter, because I did, and I was going to pursue my goals or what was important to me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I imagine in the family mediation side of things, it's great that you're coming from that found, it's the kind of, I always believe this sort of get yourself right, and then the other things kind of fall into place, rather than trying to focus on the external stuff. It's like, no, if you work within yourself and reflection, as you've mentioned, then the other stuff can. So the fact that you're helping people in these situations, I imagine there's quite a bit of empathy needed. I imagine like emotions are high. How do you deal with those more intense situations that people are trying to, or chaotic situations that people are trying to find a way within?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm naturally quite calm, so for me to sit in a room where there's high levels of conflict, it's not that it comes natural, but it's something that I chose. So I knew that that's how it was going to be. And I think sometimes I sort of a little bit thinking, this is odd, because everyone always says to me, oh my gosh, how do you do that role? Isn't it this? Isn't it that? But for me, it's what I chose. Yes, it can be quite intense because you're dealing with, other people's emotions at one of their worst sort of,
Mm.
life experiences. Um, so it can be a challenge, and so I guess it's also about having a balanced lifestyle as well. And also my role as the mediator is not to take sides, it's not to judge, it's to be that neutral, third party, with the exception of, to be an advocate for the children who aren't, necessarily in the room. Um, but that's where it's my role to manage the process. So I've got an obligation to ensure that things don't get so heated that everything crumbles. I mean, sometimes it does, and you can't always see things coming, but quite often, you can see when someone's, kind of had enough, and you can make procedural changes because, I mean, being in a room, or even if it's virtual, with someone that you've decided you don't want to be with, you might not have been in the room with them for months, for 3 hours at a, which is a normal duration of a mediation. So for sometimes it's the first time, and it's almost like a bit of an icebreaker
Mm.
then as well. So, and it's also quite interesting for me to see that there can be several families with very similar circumstances, but extremely different outcomes and different ways of managing. And it also sort of goes back on to tendencies to look at what's wrong or what's strong in that process as well.
Yeah, it must be reassuring for people in that environment to have a calm grounding force. And also, I imagine it would be common for people to go, "Oh, you're taking sides" or whatever, but for them to see that you're objective and neutral, but empathetic and grounded, and so on. I think, like many people, I'm someone who's really struggled with conflict, and it's a difficult one for me. But I've learned the importance of healthy conflict, and I've lent into that side of things. But that's always been a struggle. I think many. I don't think it's that. I used to think, oh, maybe I'm just really oversensitive to conflict, but I think many people have struggles with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, because it's um it can be quite intense. And then depending on, everyone's, I guess, background and scenarios and experience with conflict.
yeah, but it must be really interesting for you to see, like you say, to see the ways people deal with it in different, in their own different ways. That's fascinating.
Yes. And then I guess it got me um, curious about human behavior and why people respond certain ways and why others, quite differently. And then looking at it from a trauma lens, then it helps me to reframe sort of behavior as, instead of saying, oh, this, I've got a behavioral issue, or is a bit odd or quirky, or whatever the case may be, then it became more about seeing that sort of behavior as a clue around their experience, because behavior is an adaptation to one's experience.
Mm,
So if you look at it that way, then it's like, well, there's something about that individual's past and early experience that taught them that that's the way to respond.
mm.
So
Yeah,
it's easier to just accept in non-judgment,
mhm.
and also show compassion and empathy.
Yeah, human behavior is. I'm just fascinated by it every day. The quirks and the it's really. I'm very curious to it as well. Uh, like what I've read about you as well. Like, I'm a massive overthinker.
Yeah.
That's something that I've I'm continually working at, particularly creatively. Uh, I think I'm a bit better these days with the less. I'm much better these days. The self critique has quietened a bit just by doing it a long time and projects and things. Now I don't really have an issue in that sense, but I really can overthink overthink things. So this is a this is something you've also
Yes.
Have you
I'm
also have
guilty. Yes, yes, in many sort of situations, and, I
what
guess
are
that's
your
I'm
overthinking thoughts on overthinking? Sorry.
so well, this is my definition then of overthinking, is that overthinking is an analysis of a situation, but it's but so is reflection or self-reflection. They're both analysis of a situation, but they are kind of opposites. But when you look at overthinking, it's an analysis of a situation that focuses on what's wrong, the weaknesses, what's at fault, the, risks, kind of the negative. Whereas if you look at more of reflection, it's more of an analysis of a situation that focuses on what's strong, the strengths, or what could be the positives, what are the potential outcomes, and learnings from that. So if you can do one, you can do the other.
It's a
So to
I like
flip sort of overthinking into more of a reflection, it's then about, well, how can I see this situation from a what's strong lens or a strengths lens, and flip those negative assumptions and worries into, what are the benefits? What can I learn from this?
That's very cool because it's the same shift that you're talking about in your other work in the focus on the strength. So you're not saying don't try and think less or don't be less analytical or be less reflective. You're essentially saying frame it in a different way and focus on the strengths in it, because I think sometimes the overanalysis and the focus of what's wrong can overwhelm you and kind of stifle you in a way. But the reflection has come up a bit on the show. Actually, it's really the value in realistic reflection. Like, it's come up, sort of take reflection on things that have happened in the week, but also in a strength based way. What are the wins, and then what are the maybe with a different ratio, like the wins to the stuff that hasn't worked, but yeah, also acknowledging what hasn't worked, but again having like this positive approach to it. But I think that's really cool that you're essentially um applying the same idea to that as well.
Yeah, because I kind of think that, human behavior is quite complex, but also simple. It's deep and complex, but we can, if we break it down in a very simple and sort of user-friendly way, I guess my hope is that then we can look at transforming that overthinking into something to maybe be ashamed of, or to see it as a weakness and turn it into a strength, by being able to see, okay, well, how has this helped me? And I often think about, the fact that because I'm an overthinker, then it takes me a while to make decisions sometimes when it's something that I'm not, like, if I'm sure about it 100%, yes, I'll go straight ahead. But if it's something that, I'm umming and ahhing about and I'm not sure and I'm asking a friend and I'm this and that, then to sort of flip that whole situation, I kind of thought, well, how has that helped me?
Mm.
Or what has been the benefit? What can I draw out of that? And I guess what I concluded is that, well, when I do make a decision, I really explore all the available options. I make an informed decision, and then that sort of made it feel lighter for me. Then,
Mm.
yep, it's okay. I don't have to beat myself up for taking a long time to make a decision, because when I do, it's with confidence.
That's reassuring to hear that, actually, because I was going to ask, do you take time when it's time for a decision? And it's so important because when people come at you with things, and in the moment there's this pressure to make a decision, you don't have all the information you need, and it's okay to say, I appreciate it, I get back to you, and then look at it in that reflective way. So that's yeah, decision making is not easy often, but
That's right. I mean, even the small things and the big things as well. And I mean, I look at it as a mediator. I would always say to my clients, get legal advice, speak to your accountant, get whatever, sort of professional advice or information that will help them to be able to make an informed decision. So, well, why not? I do the same,
yeah,
and not be ashamed or not see it as a weakness, even though maybe other people will say, oh, Rosemary, you take so long to make a decision. It's like, well, that's me. That's what I'm going to do. And then I've sort of found that the more I flipped it into, well, I'm going to make an informed decision and it's going to be the best decision for me. And even if it's not, I'll learn something from it. So that's okay. The more I sat with that, then it actually became easier to make decisions because I felt confident. I knew that, well, what's the worst thing can happen? These aren't, life-threatening type of decisions that I had to make. So it helped the process easier. I mean, I need to buy a new bed and I have put that off because there's so many mattresses out there. But I'll try to apply it there and just go to the store.
yeah. I mean, any decision, no matter how big or small, can be kind of anxiety provoking and feel bigger than it is. Like you say, it's not. Sometimes it's not life or death, but it kind of feels like it. Um,
Because the focus is on what could go wrong.
yeah.
Generally, yeah.
Again, it's like we seem to lean to like the disaster outcomes more easily than leaning towards the, I don't know what that is within us. We seem
And I
to,
think biologically, we're primed to be on the lookout for threat,
mm,
and then we also have a negative bias. So biologically, we've got that. Then there's also our early experience and then genetics that can impact and all these
factors. So
experience and variables and our personalities, is, are we, there are a lot of people who just are more sensitive than others generally. And so then they will take on a little bit more of the external world, and that might also impact things like decision making. So that's also part of it. And that was really highlighted to me working with families where there were several children and there might be two that are managing really well with the separation and one who's really struggling. And it could be developmental differences, but it could also be that that child was just more sensitive generally and more aware of everyone else's I guess situations and where positions and wanting to sort of balance everyone else and not to upset this one or that one or whatever the case may be. And I noticed that was a theme, that there were more and more sensitive children out there.
just
And I mean, there's a lot of research on it that, I think it's about 25% of the population are more sensitive. So I guess for me as a mediator, then I think, well, is this sensitivity a biological thing, or is this a result of the experience that they've become like that because of their experience? So, and I'm with their parents for a couple of hours, 3, 4, 5, so, but it adds to that sort of curiosity and also my gathering knowledge about experience, human behavior, and trauma. And I guess one of the main things about trauma that jumped out for me was that it's less about the event or series of events and more about the impact on an individual's quality of life. Because you could have, a kind of average family, but for some reason, there's one child who's absorbing everything in the same way that another child in an abusive sort of situation would and responding, and that could be sensitivity. It could be, family conflict. I think sometimes family conflict is not seen as potentially damaging, as it can be, and a lot of people have just accepted conflict, and there was this view that it was actually separation and divorce that could be harmful, but it's really the presence of unresolved conflict. And I mean, many of us know families who, their parents, probably should have separated, but they didn't, and there's heavy conflict, and you can see the impact that it's had on those children's sense of self, who, might now be adults and then in their own relationships.
Yeah, so the ongoing conflict can potentially be worse than one significant breakup because it's just longer exposure to this
And
conflict.
it's more about unresolved, because conflict is normal, but it's about how it's resolved. And from a child's perspective, their parents are the most significant role models ever for them. So to see them in conflict and heavy conflict, and to know that they hate each other and that they show it and that they'll express it, can be quite harmful.
Yeah, the parents are like the superheroes, and it kids take it on and stuff.
That's right.
How much does your intuitive radar come into play when you're dealing with these situations?
Yes, definitely.
Mm.
Definitely. I mean, I probably would not have said intuition several years ago, but now I guess I've starting to see things a bit differently, and realizing actually I think that was, because I mean, if you look at intuition by definition, then it's kind of a knowing or an understanding that's not really based on fact. And the more I was in that role, then I was starting to see patterns that were just based on almost predictions of, well, this is what I've learned about human behavior. So if A plus B normally equals C, then I'm seeing A and B, chances are C is going to happen. So sometimes it's about guessing as well, and also falling back on that we are adaptations of our experience. So our behavior is reframed as a clue to past experience. So then looking at it that way, you can start hypothesizing as well. I mean, even though I say my role is not to judge or not to take sides, but someone walks in, responds in a particular way, it will make me think about, their experience. It might lead me to then ask, or put a certain type of question to then see if there's anything that I could do to really support the process, to make sure that, they have what they need. It could be more breaks, or even holding a mediation in separate rooms, or slowing down the process, or saying, I want everyone to get legal advice, I want everyone to see a counsellor, or whatever the case may be. But yeah, definitely. But again, it's that because I'm an overthinker, then sometimes something can present as intuition, but it's just overthinking, or also me interpreting what I've seen in the past and thinking, oh, it could be this too.
It's a tricky balance, and yeah, I think talking about intuition can sound a bit la-di-da or whatever, but yeah, I'm always fascinated in that intuitive knowing.
Yeah.
But like you
I
say,
mean, there's definitely been times where I will pursue a sort of line of thought, or way of thinking. And in a lot of the mediations that I'm doing, there's always another mediator. So it's a co-mediated model. And even with the when I was working as a therapist, there would normally be there'd normally be at least two. And there would often be times where my co-mediator would be, I could see that they're thinking, or they'd tell me after, I had no idea where you were thinking. Where the heck were you going with that? And it just it just works, and you just go with it.
yeah, no, that's interesting. It must be interesting to have the two perspectives of what happens, and that must benefit as well to have the two.
Definitely. Yeah, because sometimes being in the middle of someone else's conflict can be challenging, and also it can be a little bit tiring when so having someone else there, another mediator there, is good to help with the balance, and they might see something that I haven't picked up,
Mm.
or I might see something that they haven't, or I think it just works really, really well to help hold the room and the space.
It must be very satisfying for you to help navigate when these situations, like you say, sometimes maybe they just fall apart, they don't work, but when you find resolutions and things, it must be very satisfying.
Yeah, I think it can be very satisfying. I mean, and because you see people who come in and they're really worried and overthinking and unsure because there's so much uncertainty,
Mm.
at that time. So to be able to just sit with them and see that they leave the room and they feel a little bit of relief.
Yeah, for sure.
But then again, at the same time, my role is quite sort of, I don't know if transitional is the right word, but it's just, I'm there for a few hours and then I'm gone. So I don't really know the full extent. I mean, unless they come back and say, we need another mediation, or which is quite,
Common.
and common. So yeah, better word, common. But often, I don't really hear about how things are going. I mean, I can assume if they haven't come back, that could be good news, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a tradition on the show to have guests offer some kind of challenge given their like personal experience, or actually just given our discussion often. Is there anything that springs to mind? I mean, we've touched on a few things, reflection, decision making, this shifting the focus to the strengths and the positivity. Is there something that springs to mind that the listeners can try in their daily lives?
Yeah, I think maybe just to think about, scenarios, and particularly if there's been a stressful scenario, and it could be something like, someone, you're meeting someone and they're late, or you've lost your keys, or doesn't have to be, a major conflict, but maybe just think about that scenario and think about, well, what were my thoughts, feelings, and actions in that time? Would they come under what's wrong or what's strong? And then think about, well, if they're predominantly under what's wrong, how could I rewrite it? What would I be doing? What would I be feeling? What would I be thinking if that situation was rewritten under the what's strong lens?
Yeah, that's a good one. Reframe, no matter how big or small it is, just a reflection and a closer look at it, and like a reframe. So
And I
yeah,
think also to be strengths-based with yourself in that process, rather just it's all about learning, and it's also about it's not about going under what's strong the whole time,
mm,
but sort of realizing, hey, I was going to the what's wrong path, and it's worked for me in the past sometimes. Maybe now it's not working, or I want to try a different path. How can I rewrite that? And I guess the goal is, it's more about that reflection, and maybe that reflection time will get shorter and shorter, or will come smoother. It doesn't matter about the time, rather than being always on the what's strong. Because I notice a lot of people just talk about positivity, and and sometimes it's just not, you
it's
can't,
just
it's
you
it's
can't. Yeah,
impossible.
yeah.
And then you beat yourself up because, oh, I'm not positive, or I'm not good enough because I'm not positive, you know. So it's more about what can you learn from your own experience, and how can you see the strength in that.
Where can people find you and your work?
So the best place would be my website, rosemarygattuso.com. And then there's also links there to my social media accounts, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook.
also, yeah, I think I've realized that I've been looking at overthinking as perhaps like a weakness, but it's not. It can completely be a strength. It's okay to be
Definitely.
an overthinker.
Yep. Yep.
So
That's
yeah,
right. Don't
we've
overthink it.
don't overthink it being an overthinker. That's there. Yeah. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's been lovely chatting.